I think we're still missing a couple people, so we'll give them a few minutes to get here. I'm using a different mic than normal. Can someone give me a react for, can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I think we're missing Benjamin Chen and Grace Wu. Is anyone in a lab with one of those people or knows them or where they are? No, okay. We'll give them like one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, let's get started. Hopefully they will come in the next couple of minutes. So this is the Introduction to Counterplans elective. This is a fundamentals elective, and what that means is that we will be approaching the question of counterplans from a very kind of back to basics perspective. But my hope and kind of the way I tried to structure this is I want to, take apart what a counterplan is and how a counterplan works at its very foundation, because I think even to those people who have some experience debating counterplans and deploying counterplans, it is really easy to kind of get distracted by buzzwords and get distracted by the vocabulary that you are taught and that you learn for, you know, what words you have to say in the speech in order to check all the boxes that you need to go for a counterplan. And what gets lost is kind of what you're actually saying underneath that, which is potentially harmful because you lose some ability to adapt on the fly when you don't really have a grasp on what the fundamental nature of your argument is. So this will both be helpful for those people who are not super familiar with how counterplans work, because we will introduce all of those concepts. But for those of you who do know how counterplans work, the way that you should be thinking about this lecture is you want to be taking the ideas you already have about counterplans and trying to convert all of them into basic words, or try to have a very foundational explanation of what each of those concepts is doing in the debate in order to make the negative team win. So in that spirit, I want to start with the most basic question of all, and I would like this to be a bit of a dialogue, so feel free to unmute or chime in or say something in the chat. But yeah, what's a counterplan? What do we think? Zoe.
A position other than the squo.
A position other than the squo. Okay. The squo being what is happening right now.
Yeah.
Okay. If the AF says a global warming advantage, and the neg says that in the future, carbon capture will be invented and will solve global warming, and that is a good thing, have they read a counterplan?
No, it's like, but a counterplan is like a defensive position where that's just like being, I think, saying that like their stuff is wrong and it's a solvency. Or not a solvency, like something else will like solve. So it's a solvency question rather than like a position other than the squo.
So, okay, so you said a couple of things there. So we have defensive position. There's a solvency component. I don't know if we're quite getting there yet, because I would say the CCS argument is defense, because you're answering the warming advantage, and it has a solvency component because you're saying it solves climate change, right? We're missing one element, I would say.
It's not, it doesn't have fiat. It's not something that the neg controls.
Nice, fiat. That's exactly what I was looking for. So what's unique about a counterplan, as opposed to this example that I responded to Zoe's answer with, is that a counterplan uses fiat. So it's not just saying something will change about the status quo. It's saying something should change about the status quo, right? So it's, the negative is using the fiat power in order to introduce an advocacy of their own, right? So that's why it's called a counterplan, because the plan is an advocacy, and the counterplan is an alternative advocacy that is introduced by the negative. Okay, so that's a pretty good definition. Now that we have that definition, so a fiated advocacy that is different than the squo from the negative team, that's our definition. Why does the negative team get to win for having a counterplan? Mike.
If the counterplan solves like a good majority of the affirmative, and you have some piece of offense that outweighs that piece of the affirmative that the counterplan doesn't solve for, the rest of the case offense is basically mitigated by the counterplan, and then you can outweigh with dissed or whatever offense you have.
Okay, so what I'm hearing there is the counterplan by itself is not enough for you to win, right? You need some offensive component, and the reason that the counterplan helps you win is because the counterplan provides defense to an affirmative piece of offense. Okay, let's dig into that more. what is the defense? What are we saying about the advantage by reading a counterplan? Devin.
They're not the only way to solve for it. We can solve for it as well. So it's not.
They are not the only way to solve for it. We can solve for it as well. Okay. Why does that mean? Why is that an answer to the advantage? Like, why does that mean the negative should win?
Because it's an advocacy of the negs. That's just, I'm trying to think of the words to describe this. Because it's an advocacy of the negs, it's just part of the negs arguments. It's kind of like saying the status quo is better in the same way that saying the counterplan advocacy is better than the plan.
Okay, so, well, but the reason the counterplan advocacy is better is because of the net benefit in this example, right? That's the offense part. So the counterplan part is defense. So that's kind of the part that I want to focus on now. You are right that like the whole strategy is a reason the negative wins because it's saying the negative is better than the affirmative. But all negative arguments do that. And the part that's really doing the legwork there is the disad, right? So I guess to more directly hit the nail on the head, right? We have advantages that have, advantages have uniqueness, they have links, they have internal links, they have impacts. Which part of the advantage is being answered by a counterplan? Michael.
The internal links.
Why do you think that?
Well, these counterplan fiats pass some of the problems that the internal links have. And if it's competitive and there's opportunity cost of the plan, then the next should win.
Well, I don't know about that. So the advantage says we need to do the AF in order to solve climate change. We solve climate change through climate sequestration or through like carbon sequestration, for example. The neg reads a counterplan to do it by blocking out the sun. Have they disproven the AF's internal link? Like carbon sequestration solves warming is not a claim that has been contested by the counterplan. So no, I would not say that a counterplan that it makes a defensive argument addresses the internal link to an advantage. Something else. Mira.
It probably resolves the impact portion of the AF.
So I agree that it resolves the impact portion, but it doesn't disprove the impact, does it? Because it says, climate change is still a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So which part of the advantage is being answered by the counterplan directly? Zoe.
I'm not exactly sure. That's why I came here, but I think it might be solvency.
No, solvency is the internal links, which the counterplan is not saying the AF doesn't solve, right?
The reason I thought that is because it's sort of disproving the desirability of the AF, right? By proposing an opportunity cost, like an alternate AF efficacy.
Yeah, sometimes that's so part of the reason why I'm asking this question is because we started this off with the example of a counterplan that makes a defensive argument against an advantage and then relies on an external net benefit, right, or a disad to generate its offense. So you are right, Zoe, that is a way that counterplans can give you the ability to win, but with this example, that's not actually what's happening. So the reason I asked this is because a lot of times, and I've started counterplan lectures this way before, where I've said you think a counterplan is an advocacy, but it's actually not, because what it actually is an opportunity cost or whatever. But I think that explanation is too simple because of what we were just experiencing here. Because there's actually two different kinds of arguments that a counterplan can be that work pretty differently from one another. And one is this idea of opportunity cost. So an opportunity cost is an economics idea, which says that by making one choice, you are giving up the ability to do something else. So if you do, if you spend, you have $10, you spend them on one thing, you cannot spend your $10 on something else. Or like you have a piece of wood, you whittle a turtle out of it, you can't whittle a dog out of it anymore, right? So opportunity cost, it's when you do something and then by doing that thing, you lose the opportunity to do something else, right? So that's one counterplan idea. A different counterplan idea, though, is what we were just talking about, which is counterplans as a piece of case defense. And the answer I was looking for what part of an advantage is disproven by a counterplan is actually uniqueness. So if you think about it, a counterplan does not disprove the impact, right? The advantage still, the counterplan agrees the advantage, whatever the end point of the advantage is a big deal. It doesn't disprove the internal link because we're agreeing the AF probably solves. But uniqueness for an advantage says that the benefit that is claimed by the advantage is unique to the affirmative world, right? So you might have learned uniqueness by saying uniqueness is what's happening now, right? What that really means is for the F, your uniqueness is that what's happening now or in a world of the neg is bad. And what's happening in the world of the F is good. So the good is unique to the world of the F. The counterplan changes that. The counterplan makes it so the good part is not unique to the world of the F anymore because it introduces another world within which the good thing that is being accomplished by the advantage is present. So the part of the advantage that is being directly challenged by a counterplan is uniqueness. It is not the other stuff. And the reason that matters is because you all were mentioning this idea that, the counterplan is defense or the counterplan is an opportunity cost, right? And I think it's important to be super clear about this issue because one of these versions of a counterplan is defense and the other version of the counterplan is offense. So the version of a counterplan that says an advantage to the affirmative is not unique to the plan is defense because it's saying the plan is not necessary to achieve whatever benefit it's trying, they've set out to gain. Whereas the opportunity cost version is offense. It's saying the plan has foregone something that would be better. A counterplan can be both of these things, right? So a counterplan can say it solves the F and it can claim some benefit to doing the counterplan that is foregone by doing the plan, right? A process counterplan typically will attempt to do both of these things. But a counterplan does not need to do both of these things in order to help the negative prove that they should win the debate. So let's think about this. So let's say, let's go back to the example that I was giving earlier about the warming advantage and a warming advantage counterplan. Which one of these is the counterplan? So the AF has said warming advantage. The neg has said, we don't need to do the plan. We can solve the warming advantage by blocking out the sun with a bunch of ash. Which argument is being made by the counterplan? What do we think? Zoe.
I think it would be the uniqueness one, the blocking out the sun with the ash.
Yeah, why would it be uniqueness?
Because it shows that there's a different way we could achieve like the goal of stopping warming.
Right, exactly. It's saying that the benefit of solving warming is not unique to the affirmative plan. And if you think about it, it's not an opportunity cost, right? If the negative read an advantage to doing the ash or whatever, then that advantage would not be a reason why the affirmative team should win. And why is that, Zoe?
Oh, I had a question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, what's up?
So like wouldn't opportunity cost sort of be like an agent counterplan with like a net benefit to using that agent? Well, like an alternative way that you could solve like a problem would be the uniqueness question.
Like, it depends, and this comes back to the thing I was saying earlier about how like a counterplan can do both depending on what specific arguments the counterplan makes. All I want to say here is a counterplan does not need to do both in order to be a piece of a winning negative strategy. So for example, if the negative is just reading states, let's say, so the AF says the federal government should do something, the neg is saying the states can solve that problem, and their net benefit to this is politics. The source of offense in this strategy is politics, right? The counterplan is not providing any offense. The counterplan is not making an argument for why the plan is bad. All the counterplan is doing is saying the plan is not a unique, the advantages to the plan are not unique to the world of the plan because the counterplan solves them too. And the offense is coming from the disad. So that's not really an opportunity cost. That's just a cost, right? So the cost is linking to the disad. And you can avoid that cost by voting for the counterplan instead. But do you see how that's different? Kind of. Whereas if the neg read a state's counterplan and said, doing the state's counterplan sets a precedent that makes federalism really strong, right? And the perm forecloses that or stops that because the plan breaks the counterplan through preemption or something, then you have an opportunity cost argument, because by doing the plan, you're giving up the chance to solve federalism with the counterplan. Does it make sense how those are different?
Yeah, so the way the counterplan would generate offense is by introducing that opportunity cost.
Basically, yeah. Yeah, it's the question is where does the offense come from? Does the offense come from the plan gives up the ability to do something better? Or does the offense come from the plan is bad or causes something bad? If the plan causes something bad, that's a disad. It's not the offense is not coming from the counterplan. But if the offense is coming from the counterplan, then you're saying the plan gives up the ability to do something better. So it's not that doing the plan causes something bad, it is that there is a better way. And the plan gives that up.
Do you think like a counterplan is more strategic when it relies on an external net benefit like a disad, or when it like has an internal net benefit baked into the process of the counterplan?
No, there's a lot of different, there's reasons, there's situations where each of them would be better. I'm not saying one is better than another. All I wanted to do right now is just clarify that these are different. Are we there?
Yeah, thanks.
Is everyone on the same page with me? Okay. So why do we get to win for having a counterplan? We already kind of went over that. The debate term for some of what we just talked about is competition. So both the version of the counterplan where it's defense and the version of the counterplan where it's offense, in order for the negative to win, either the counterplan or some other piece of the negative strategy has to prove the plan is bad. This could either be through a disad, which would be the one where the counterplan is defense and there's an external disad that the plan causes, or it could be through opportunity cost, which is saying that the plan is giving up an opportunity to do something better. And this maps onto the two ways that we normally think about a counterplan competing. Someone give me one of those ways. Do we know? Two ways that a counterplan can compete or prove the plan is bad. Zoe, yeah.
You can't do both, or you shouldn't do both.
Yeah, those are the two, exactly. Mutual exclusivity is the first one. So that's the first one you mentioned, and it's that the plan and counterplan cannot both be done at once. So the plan increases water protection, the counterplan decreases it. Yeah, so doing the opposite of the plan is usually the example that where this works. Most of the time, counterplans are not competing off of mutual exclusivity. Instead, most of them are competing off of the second thing you said, which we call net benefits. And the net benefits say that the plan and counterplan should not both be done. So you can compete by saying the plan and counterplan cannot both be done, and then winning that the counterplan would be better. Or you could win on net benefits, which is the plan and counterplan should not both be done. So with mutual exclusivity, you know, that's usually where your strongest opportunity cost arguments are going to come from. With net benefits, you can have both. Like I said, you can have an internal net benefit, which is where we're getting into opportunity cost territory, or you can have an external net benefit, which is a disad, and the counterplan can just be doing defense by trying to solve part of the case. Questions so far? I'm not sure which ones of you are taking this like as a fundamentals lecture and learning about counterplans kind of for the first time. So I know I'm getting into a lot of different stuff. So if something is confusing, feel free to stop me because I do not want to leave anyone behind here. Okay. Yeah, Grace.
Wait, so is it like in order to be offensive and defensive at the same time, you need an internal net benefit and a net benefit itself?
Not really. So the way I would think about it is, so when you talk about a counterplan, right, you have the solvency part of a counterplan, right? So the counterplan solves the case. And then you have the net benefit part of the counterplan, which is the counterplan itself either does something good that the plan stops, or it avoids some disadvantage to the plan, right? So the solvency part, the part that says the counterplan solves the F, that's defense. It's saying the advantage to the plan is not unique. The net benefit part is offense. It's saying the plan causes something bad, which would be the disad, or it's saying the counterplan causes something good that the plan messes up. Either way, you need offense in your strategy. The difference is just in one of those situations, the offense comes from the counterplan. It comes from like reading an advantage to the counterplan that the plan would mess up. And in another situation, it comes from the disad, which is separate. That's kind of why I said the counterplan doesn't have to be both offense and defense. It could be just one or the other. Because if you think about it, the counterplan also does not need a defense piece, right? Like in a mutually exclusive counterplan, for example, let's say the plan bans, I don't know, let's say they have bans putting any chemicals at all in Lake Erie, for example, because it needs to be a pristine natural environment or whatever. And the neg says, counterplan, we have a super awesome chemical that we can put in there, and it does something super trolly and like really good for the economy, right? The neg doesn't need their counterplan to solve anything about the F in order to win on it, right? They don't need a defense piece. They can just win by saying the F for like gives up the option to do this awesome chemical that's good for the economy, and that outweighs the F, right? So that would be a version of a counterplan where it's just offense. There's no defensive piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is that kind of like sufficiency framing where you're like it doesn't need to have full solvency?
Well, sufficiency, like whenever you start getting into, so sufficiency and necessity and all of those questions, that's all part of the solvency debate, which is defense. So all of the solvency debate is saying the counterplan can solve as well as the plan, which means the benefit, the advantage is not unique to the plan because the counterplan solves it too. This is actually, it's good that you brought this up because another way to phrase this is the plan is sufficient to solve the advantage, right? That's the internal link argument, which the counterplan is not contesting. It is sufficient to solve the advantage, but it is not necessary to solve the advantage. In other words, you can solve the advantage without doing the plan. So that's what sufficient versus necessary framing means, is you're saying like, just because the AF read a card that they are enough to solve something, that does not mean that without doing the AF, you cannot solve it, because those are two different issues. Yeah, Zoe.
Like, do counterplans always need to like solve the land sus parts of the plan, or can they just sort of be used like a disad, like only derived competition based on the fact that it's an opportunity cost?
Yes. So that's exactly kind of what I was getting at, which is you're absolutely right. The counterplan does not need to have a solvency argument. All the counterplan is the text, right? The counterplan itself, as we kind of started off by saying, the counterplan is when the neg uses fiat to advocate something. Based on that advocacy, you can use that advocacy for multiple things. You could use it for defense by saying that advocacy solves the AF without using the AF, right? Without using the plan. Or you can use it for offense by using it to generate some opportunity costs, right? You do not need both. All you need is you need some offense in the debate, but that offense does not need to come from the counterplan. It can come from a disad instead. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. So competition. So we test. So we have mutual exclusivity and we have net benefits. The way that we test competition is with permutations. And permutations, we have two requirements usually for what is considered a legitimate permutation. So remember, the point of a permutation is to challenge the neg's argument that the counterplan disproves the plan. In order to do this, the neg or the F is essentially making a no link argument against whatever offense the neg is presenting. So again, this offense can come from a disad or it can come from the counterplan with this opportunity cost thing. In either case, the permutation is making a no link argument. It is saying you do not need to give up the plan to avoid the cost that the neg is presenting, whether that's a direct cost from a disad or an opportunity cost from the counterplan. Does everyone follow that? So the perm is a no link argument to the offensive piece of the counterplan strategy. Okay. Because the perm is doing this, in order for the perm to serve this function of proving that there is no link and that you don't need to give up the plan, the perm has to include the whole plan. Otherwise, otherwise the perm is not proving what it is setting out to prove, right? If you use a severance perm, like if you perm to do the counterplan against like an advantage counterplan that does something completely different to solve global warming or whatever, your perm argument does not prove that the plan can avoid the offense because the perm doesn't include the plan. So even if the perm avoids the offense, that does not mean you should win because your perm isn't proving that the plan doesn't link to the offense. Does that make sense? Why logically the perm should not be severance? Yeah, Zoe.
To avoid like severing out of the plan or to like avoid adding parts that aren't in the plan or counter plan, would it be like cheaty to like make the perm text like sort of like, let's say the best example I could think of is like the lie perm, where you like do like all of the aff and then like you copy and paste some of the counter plan and like right after another and then like re-explain it in the debate like as something, because like it doesn't like read like it's like you lie to them, you know?
I think what you're getting at is textual and functional competition, which I don't really want to talk about right now, but the basic idea of what you're asking is there are two different ways you can try to figure out if the perm meets these requirements for legitimacy. And one of them is by looking at the text. So does it include all the words in the plan and no more than all of the words of the plan in the counter plan, which that's textual competition. So if you're trying to determine if the perm's legitimate by just the text, that's textual competition. Or you could try to do it by the function. So what does the plan do and what does the counter plan do? And does the perm do everything the plan does and no more than what the plan and counter plan do? Right? So those are two different ways you can use to try to figure out if a perm is legitimate. And what you're saying is you can avoid being textually intrinsic by building your perm out of words from the counterplan text. And I agree, in a process counterplan debate, that can be a good idea. But that is a little in the weeds for now. All right. Ben asks how abusive are intrinsic perms and what would be the argument against it? Sure. So, and by the way, there are arguments for all of these ideas that I'm not covering. So like, for example, there's a fairness argument against severance too. Like there's a moving target argument against severance. The reason I'm not really getting into those is because I'm kind of trying to break it down to like the most foundational level of like what all these arguments are doing and like what is actually happening in the debate when you're saying this. So that's why I'm just focusing on those things. For the intrinsicness idea, so the argument against intrinsic perms is the same as the argument against intrinsicness against a politics disad, for example. In fact, it's called that because they're the same argument. An intrinsic perm and an intrinsicness argument against a politics disad are both saying you can avoid the opportunity cost by doing some extraneous thing. And I think that the best argument against intrinsicness is that intrinsicness does not prove that intrinsicness does, or an intrinsic permutation does not prove that among the options presented, the plan can avoid the link. And presenting new options is not a power that the affirmative has because their fiat power is constrained by the topic. So the app can't just make up new stuff and add it to the plan to avoid the opportunity cost. because that is non-topical fiat. That is, I would say, the most foundational objection to intrinsic permutations. But like with the other thing, there are many arguments about why intrinsic perms are bad, such as they are unpredictable, so you can add whatever you want. It's aff conditionality because you can modify your proposal and then kick your modification if you don't like your intrinsic perm. You can make a neg ground argument saying that if intrinsic perms were allowed, that would be able to solve any disadvantage, and that would be unfair. But yeah. Zoe.
So I heard you like mention this when you were answering a question earlier. Is there like such like thing as functionally intrinsic? Because like I've never heard that argument, at least in debate.
So there's functional severance, there's functional and textual severance, and there's functional and textual intrinsicness. All it means is it's how you're determining whether or not the plan or whether or not the perm meets these requirements. So a functionally intrinsic perm would be a perm that includes functions that are not in the plan or the counterplan. A textually intrinsic perm includes text that is in neither the plan nor the counterplan. A functionally severing perm is a perm that removes some function that is in the plan, and a textually severing perm is an argument that removes words that are in the plan. So it's all the same like logical argument, but the functional and textual difference is just about how you like measure what the plan is. Do you look at like what it does, or do you look at what it says? That's all it is. But again, if you are not following along with this textual functional business, don't worry about it, because basically you can ignore textual competition for now for the purposes of understanding this, because textual competition is very dumb. And I can go into detail about why later. By the way, all of these electives are going to be uploaded onto the DDI YouTube channel. And my last elective is I will be rambling about why intrinsic perms and intrinsicness arguments are good for an hour. So if you're interested in that, you can watch it there later. If you're interested in, and I will also talk about why textual competition is bad, so you can do that also, but that's not really what I want to talk about right now. People with me? Okay. So let's say you have a counterplan. You have a net benefit to the counterplan, and your counterplan is competitive, so it cannot be solved with a permutation. Is that enough? Does the neg win automatically, or does the neg need to do something else? What do we think? For those of you who have been following along with your counterplan vocabulary, it might help to think about when the 2AC answers a counterplan. We have an acronym, and we've covered most of the acronym so far. There's one theme that is missing. Anyone know?
Solvency deficit.
No, that's the defense part. Grace.
Theory?
Yeah, theory. So we can have a counterplan that solves the F and has a net benefit and is competitive. but the counterplan still loses because of theory. So why would all of those requirements not be enough to disprove the aff? What could be wrong with a counterplan that theory is getting at, despite the fact that it is proving that the plan is bad and it solves the plan and it's competitive? What do we think? Yeah, Zoe.
That the counterplan is bad for debate.
Yeah, so that's a reasonable umbrella term. I would say there are two main themes within that we can talk about. The one that's more directly speaking to what you're probably thinking of is fairness. So if the counterplan is unfair to debate about, then we can exclude it from the conversation, right? We can say, yes, this counterplan might actually disprove the plan. It might be a real opportunity cost, but something about this counterplan is unfair and destructive to debate, so we should not talk about it. And fairness is the main consideration, but you could have other reasons for this that I think are worse, but you could say them also, which is like the counterplan hurts education, or you could say the counterplan is unpredictable. Although the predictability thing also just gets back to fairness. But yeah, so that's kind of theme number one. Yeah, Zoe.
Or like, so like squirrely process counterplans, like research process counterplans would like be bad for debate because they can avoid like the affs, like the good things about the aff, because if the research doesn't like the aff, and when you're disproving like on case that the aff is bad, that's like stuff that like the study, for example, would find. So it just like avoids everything good about the aff. And if they find that the aff ends up being good and your case arguments don't like go through, then like aff happens anyway.
Yeah, so that's a good example of a super cheaty and unfair counterplan. And the genre that you're talking about, which is process counterplans, is mainly what I'm referring to by this. So like a counterplan that is just, that's, you know, we just decide that's not what the debate should be about, and on that basis we reject the counterplan. This is similar to rejecting like a rider disadd-on theory, because based on our interpretation of fiat, like we don't think that this is a valuable thing to have in the conversation, so we should interpret fiat in such a way that this is not a relevant objection. Similarly here, we are saying we are not caring about this because we do not think it is a valuable thing to talk about, and we are kind of screening it out. So that's theme number one. I would say there's one other super important theme. So let's make this a real world example. Let's say you are thinking about buying a car, for example, and you are thinking to yourself, like, should I buy the car or not? And your advantages, you get to drive around, and your disadvantages, it costs a lot of money. So you're like, I don't know. It's like, is it worth it? Would it be reasonable for you to resolve this dilemma by saying, I know Jeff Bezos should buy me a car? Solved. We did it. We no longer have an issue. I no longer have to spend money because Jeff Bezos bought me the car. What's the problem with that solution to this dilemma? Yeah, Mira.
I mean, I guess you could say that fiating individual actors is not justifiable, like individual people.
Yeah, like you could make a fairness argument about private actor fiat for sure, but like think broader. So like,
Could you just say fiat is bad in like this case? It's too broad.
I mean, what about the fiat makes it bad? Like forget about debate words for a second. Like I'm asking, like in this literal hypothetical, if your parents asked you, do you want to buy a car? And you said, Jeff Bezos will buy me a car. That is my answer to your question. What's the problem with that? Zoe? Yeah, Zoe.
It's not mutually exclusive.
Like,
I mean, you could
Yeah,
want a
spe-
car and also get a car from
I
someone.
agree. Spending disadvantage. It's bad to spend money. That is your answer to the perm. Yeah, Grace.
It's like unrealistic.
Yeah, it's unrealistic. Jeff Bezos is not gonna. It's like if your parents asked you like, should you buy a car, and you were like, Jeff Bezos should buy me a car, your parents would be like, great, but like he won't. That's like not an option. Because, right? So there's a realism question, right? So this part connects to our uniqueness argument, right? So like when the neg reads a uniqueness card about an advantage and says like, your advantage is non-unique, it will be solved by something else, like the status quo will solve something else. One of the answers that's available to you is you can say, no, this thing won't happen. Similarly, this theory argument is doing the same thing, which is you are saying that this advocacy is an unreasonable basis for a decision maker to reject the plan. So it would be unreasonable to say I should not buy a car because hypothetically Jeff Bezos could buy me one, because that is not relevant. It's like that will not happen. So how is this different, you might be thinking, from, well, it's like, doesn't the neg get fiat? Like this is like fiat is all about causing things to happen that would not normally happen. It's a little different because what we're saying is not that the counterplan is unrealistic or that the counterplan is unlikely to occur just by itself. What we're saying is there is no decision maker who can make a choice between on one hand buying a car and on the other hand simply receiving a car from Jeff Bezos. Yeah, Zoe.
So like my understanding is that like when you're aft, you can feel that something happens, but not everything will be like a-okay after it happens. Just like that, like the neg would get constraints on the fiat power of their counterplans, and would the main like area of like what restricts what they can do be literature based? Like if it's in the lit, then it's predictable and you could do it, but if not, then you can't do it.
This isn't really about predictability. It's saying like, is it logical to make a choice between these two things? So in the first one, that's where I think the fairness concerns or the like bad for debate concerns is where your thing about literature might come in. So you might say like this counterplan is bad or it's unfair, or it's unpredictable, or it's bad for debate because there's no literature about it. It's unpredictable. It's not the core of the topic. You could say that. What I'm talking about is, I'm talking about agent counterplans here, which includes states, includes private actor fiat, like Mira mentioned. It includes international counterplans. It includes like the world government counterplan or multilateral counterplans, right? So all of those things, you can reject them because they're an unreasonable basis for a decision maker to reject the plan. So if you are the US and you are thinking like, should the US, like federal government, do water protection? Saying no, the US federal government should not do water protection because the states will do it instead is not a decision anyone in the real world can make, because there is no one who can know that the federal government will do something, and also know that if the federal government forgoes that, then the states will do it, right? No one has both of those pieces of fiat power, so it is not a reasonable comparison. It's not like those are not choices that are available to any real person. Yeah, Zoe.
So if people can't make that decision in the real world, then would it be like unfair? Would the argument be it's unfair to make the judge make those choices?
it's not about fairness. It's just, it's not a logical opportunity cost. Like the premise of opportunity costs is when one person has to make a choice, and by making one choice, that person forgoes another opportunity that was previously available to them. The opportunity to have the states act and do the plan is not an opportunity cost, because that opportunity was never available. Like if you're the federal government and you're saying we need to do water protection, you cannot be like, instead of the federal government doing water protection, the states should all act in unison to do water protection. That's not an opportunity that anybody can choose instead of the plan, because that's not how the government works.
All right, that makes sense.
Okay. Very briefly before we wrap up, I want to mention, so this was kind of, theory in a couple of minutes. It's like, what is theory doing? It is saying like a uniqueness argument or opportunity cost should not be considered. And that speaks to like whether a counterplan or an advocacy is ever acceptable. So like this would say like process counterplans never acceptable, or states counterplans never acceptable. I want to close by offering you some notions about creative ways that you can use creative ways that you can use negative fiat that are situational and that counterplans uniquely let you do because of their fiated nature. So in other words, what can you do with a defensive argument or an offensive argument that you are fiating that you cannot do with a normal defensive argument or offensive argument? So like, what can you do with an op cost that you can't do with a disad, and what can you do with a counterplan that solves that you cannot do with a non-unique argument? The most obvious one is you can make soft contradictions between which the affirmative cannot really make cross applications. The free market counterplan and the strict regulation counterplan, you can read them both at once. The affirmative has to say both are bad. The affirmative cannot cross apply the free market counterplan to disprove the strict regulation counterplan, because that is not how that works. You can kick out of stuff whenever you want because of conditionality. Same with a counterplan and a critique. You can make a contradiction and kick out of it. This is something that is unique to counterplans that disads you cannot do, because with a disad, the affirmative can straight turn it. Another thing you can do is you can read defense that the affirmative cannot concede. So the cool thing about conditionality is if you have a conditional counterplan that solves the case, even though you are making a uniqueness argument, the affirmative cannot concede this uniqueness argument to get out of a straight turn. So let's say you're straight impact turning an advantage. You can read a counterplan that solves that advantage. Even though you are making a defensive argument, the affirmative cannot concede your counterplan to get out of the impact turn, because you can kick the counterplan whenever you want. Because the defensive argument is dependent on the existence of this text or this advocacy, which you can jettison at will. So that's pretty nice. You can also solve affirmative straight turns. Let's say you read a politics disad and they read a non-unique argument and link turned it. So that's a straight turn. You can counterplan to pass the politics disad. And that is a new piece of defense against their straight turn that did not contradict your original argument, because it is only saying that that straight turn is non-unique in a world in which the counterplan happens, which you never contested earlier. So you would not be able to read, It's like you can obviously defend your original uniqueness argument and that achieves the same thing, but you can use it. You can also just fiat through the uniqueness debate and just pass the agenda item. But you don't even have to do that, because any counterplan that you had in the debate before, like a process counterplan or a states counterplan, if it solves the AF's link turn argument, then it is a uniqueness argument against the offense they have generated by straight turning your disad, because the benefit claimed by the straight turn, which is their link turn, is no longer unique to the world of the plan, because your counterplan also solves it. You can also kick straight turned arguments. Oh, that was what I was just describing earlier. So yeah, these are kind of the same. Yeah, that's true. It is kind of broken. Which is why, yeah, counterplans are weird, but it's like, so all of this stuff depends on conditionality, which that's a whole separate discussion. But that's kind of the unique feature of counterplans as an argument in debate. And also, any advocacy, the fact that advocacies have status, they can be conditional, meaning you can get rid of them whenever you want. Dispositional, meaning you can get rid of them under certain conditions only, or unconditional, meaning you can never get rid of them. For all of these reasons, you should obviously always pick conditional, and then just cheat aggressively. It's very nice. You're gonna be a total terrorist. Questions about any of these? Yeah, Zoe.
Could you maybe like explain with like an example the kicking like the straight turned arcs through resolving the link with counterplan or link turn?
Yeah, so let's say you read a politics disad. So let's say you read infrastructure politics. You said infrastructure coming now. The plan stops it because it drains political capital. Infrastructure is good for the economy. And then the AF says infrastructure is not coming now, but the plan causes infrastructure because it is good for the economy, or because it is like popular, and then that is good for the economy. You can counterplan to pass infrastructure. The benefit of infrastructure then becomes non-unique to the plan because the counterplan also solves it. Or you can also use this to get rid of impact turns. So same thing, you ride your infrastructure disad, it ends in it's good for economic growth. The AF DDEVs, right? And you counterplan to not pass infrastructure. Then the benefit of avoiding passing infrastructure, which is good for DDEV, is no longer unique to the world of the plan because the counterplan does not pass infrastructure.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, Grace.
Wait, so is that like making a new counterplan in like the 2NC then?
You could do this in the 2NC, or if you're worried that this will happen to you, you can do it in the 1NC preemptively. Or you can also remember, you don't necessarily need a dedicated new counterplan to achieve this function, because let's say you've read an agent counterplan. So like, let's say you read courts, right? And you never made the argument that courts was, or the politics was a net benefit to courts. You can then in the 2NC read cards that say courts link to politics, and that solves the DDEV impact turn. You see what I'm saying? So the plan stops infrastructure. That's good because it causes DDEV. That's the AF's argument. You're saying my courts counterplan that I already had solves that because it also stops infrastructure. because it links to politics.
Oh, okay, I get it. So okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So like you had your impact turn, and then you were potentially screwed, but now you don't have to answer the impact turn anymore because you can just solve it with your counterplan. And the worst part is they can't even, it's like you can still extend your original impact. So like if you reversed, yeah, it's like if you can still extend your original economy impact and you would not be double turning yourself because your counterplan is conditional. So it's not like the AF can get rid of DDEV, because if they get rid of DDEV, then you can just kick the counterplan and go for your original disad. So it's very nice because the AF can't make you do anything. There are infinite more trolly things you can do with counterplans in this vein. Mainly wherever you can think of a situation where the AF wants to constrain the neg in some way in terms of their strategic options or their flexibility. Usually if you sprinkle a counterplan into the mix, the neg can enhance their position in the debate. And these are some examples of this, but really it's like any situation where the AF is trying to force the neg to do something, the neg can use a counterplan to get their original options back most of the time. Questions about anything that I talked about? Okay. So yeah, I hope those of you who are kind of learning about this stuff for the first time, you found this helpful. And for those of you who already knew about some of this stuff, I hope that you all take away a new way of looking at what these arguments are in terms of what function they are serving for accomplishing the neg's job of proving the plan is a bad idea. So yeah, if you have other questions about this that like come up later, you can always feel free to Slack me about them. Otherwise, probably have to go to your next elective, right? Is that soon? Yeah, go to your next electives.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank
Yep.
you.